Morning, Walt.
Morning, guys.
Are you
See
home
you all.
or West Coast? I forget what you said.
No, I'm for this week and next week. I'm home in Glen Olden, and in 2 weeks, my third time with you, I'll be in Burton, Texas. And if
Texas.
you yeah, if you drive to the center of Texas and find nowhere, and then go another couple hours, that's where Burton is. That's we'll see how the internet performs down there. That'll be an adventure. But
What is it they say? It's not the end of the world, but you can see it from there.
that's about right. It's a beautiful place. It's my wife's grandfather's farm, and it's, I don't know, six
A little
hundred
different than
acres of
Huddell.
Tennessee walking horses, and it's it's breathtaking country. It's a little warm, but it's beautiful. I'm going to try to share my screen here.
Good work.
We'll see how that goes.
Are we recording that?
Can we see PowerPoint-like slides there?
Yep, you should be able to. I'm not seeing them yet.
Right, are we recording too?
Yes, we are recording.
Okay. And maybe now. Yeah,
Yeah, gotcha.
good. So we did something similar to what we're going to do over the next 3 weeks. I think it was 4 or 5 years ago that we talked about this, and I'd like to sort of do that a little more fully and maybe with a little more detail, and looking at a couple traditions that weren't there. And that's I want us to look a little bit at a text in Colossians. Let me take a step back and give you a sense of how I kind of got here. So we all have, when we talk about our Lord Jesus, we all have certain images that come in our minds, right? And those images, of course, are inadequate, but we think of a Jew who's walking around in the first century and preaching and healing people. We think of a man who goes to a cross and rises from the dead, right? It's I was about to say straightforward, but that's a misleading term. But we can imagine this man and his place in the context of history, this man that's incarnate. And when we think about the pre-incarnate Christ, when we think about the word that was before all things were made, at least in my head, it's early on in my faith, I imagined a guy with a beard who was kind of ghost-like, who sat next to an old man in a chair, right? That's how I sort of imagined what that might look like. And maybe you have that kind of image too, right? And again, all these images in our head are going to be inadequate. And as we grow, we perhaps more fully begin to appreciate how much more he is than that, right? We begin to appreciate his in abstract theological ways, how much more he is than that, in very practical ways. And we see the way he works in our own lives and the lives of the people around us. And so I want to think in those categories. Are there ways that we can understand him more fully? And in my academic career, I find some ideas that are helpful. Greek ideas and Hebrew ideas and maybe even other ancient Near Eastern ideas that work their way into my mind, and in some ways are helpful and in some ways are insufficient, right? And what kind of connects the dots for this to me is, I do math, and part of that story is a consideration of the Pythagoreans. I'm interested in that kind of Pythagorean mysticism, and the temptation I find for me is that when I read some of these Pythagorean ideas and some of these Greek ideas, it's really easy for me to kind of map, I don't know which way the mapping goes, but to map those ideas onto Christian doctrine or to take Christian doctrine and to map them onto those ideas. And that can be perilous and it could be helpful in some contexts. So that is, are these other traditions helpful in some ways in helping us to see Christ more fully? And in other ways, are they harmful? Do they take us away from seeing him as he is? So that's kind of what I want to explore a little bit through these the exciting title I had was Logos, Cosmos, and Chaos. And what I'd like to see us get out of this is just how much more he is than these ideas that we come upon in these other traditions. And hopefully we walk away loving him more. And we'll do that this week. We'll sort of start from a Christian text, right? We'll read Colossians, which I've spent some time with you on before, and then next week we'll look a little more at some of the Greek ways that this has been thought about, and maybe from there we'll look at some of the ancient Near Eastern ways that some of this has been thought about. And I'm still working out some of these ideas. I guess, are there any ideas that we're not all to some degree still working out? But I welcome your help as we do it, and right, our ideas are always refined with conversation with others. So please feel free to interrupt and shake your fist and offer whatever counsel you can as we go. So we want to start by looking at Colossians 1. This is a Christ hymn in Colossians 1. Let me give a little context for Colossians. Paul's writing to this church in Colossae, and what's going on in that church is they are holding themselves to certain practices, certain feasts, certain kinds of asceticism that come out of perhaps a worship of angels. Maybe there's a kind of proto-Gnosticism going on. This is a little too early for a full-blown Gnosticism, but maybe there's a little bit of a kind of proto-Gnosticism going on in Colossae. And they were largely worshiping angels in a kind of hierarchy, and angels, heavenly bodies, things like that. And Paul's addressing that, and part of what he's doing here is establishing Christ's superiority over all those things, right? So that they're concerned with a kind of hierarchy of angelic beings and paying homage to those. And Paul is in some ways saying, listen, don't waste your time. You're missing the point. He's better, right? It's a little bit like what the author of Hebrews is doing. He's better than the high priest. He's better than the angels. And Paul's doing something similar here, it seems to me. And so why don't we read the text and we'll pray over it and then unpack it a little bit. And then that'll lead us into where we're going to be going over the next few weeks. So he's the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him. And he's before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from among the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross. And I just want to pray over the text for a moment, Lord. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be pleasing in your sight, my rock and my redeemer. Show us what you would have from your word and transform us by the renewing of our minds. I pray in the name of Christ. Amen. So let's just spend a few minutes here unpacking the text. So he's the image of the invisible God. That's interesting, isn't it? Right? Things we don't think of things that are invisible as having an image. If you imagine a mirror, There's no real reflection, right? But it's telling us he's the image of something that's invisible. So through the Son, the Father is made visible. John 1 tells us something like that, right? It's by him that we see him. If we see him, we've seen the Father, right? That's he's the means by which he's made known. Right? He is in Second Corinthians, or sorry, in Hebrews, Christ is the effluence of God's glory. So it's by looking at the Son, we see what God is like. We had a president a couple presidents ago at the university named David Black, and David used to. Tony Campolo does this too. They used to talk about the red letters, right? So there's something valuable in reading the red letters, the words of Christ, and the Gospels more broadly, because by seeing him, seeing what he's like, seeing what he does, we understand more fully who God is. And he's the firstborn of all creation. We'll talk about that a little more later. He is responsible for the creation of all things. He's the means by which the Father creates. So the Father speaks, and by means of the Word, he creates. And you're seeing a little bit of the occasion of the letter in verse 16. There are all these things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible. Or you're maybe seeing Paul addressing some of this kind of heretical thought within the church there, within that community, right? He is the one that is creating all those things. They're created through him and for him, right? So one of these Greek ideas are Aristotle's four causes, right? I don't know how much time you spend thinking about this. There's the material cause. That's kind of like what stuff is made out of. I'm sitting in a chair. The material cause is probably largely plastic, right? There's the formal cause, right? That's sort of, you can imagine that as sort of being the blueprint or the idea by which this chair is built. There's the efficient cause, which is the builder of the chair, the person who's putting the chair together. And then there's the final cause. There's the purpose of the chair, right? The purpose of the chair is for me to sit in, right? And what Paul's doing here is thinking about a couple of these causes. It's saying Christ is the efficient cause of all things. He is the one by whom all things were made. But it also says that, so they're created through him, but they're also created for him. He's the final cause. He's the goal. He's the end to which all things are pointed, right? So there's a kind of comprehensiveness to him there. And he's before all things, and in him all things hold together. We'll spend some more time talking about that in a minute. It gives us something about his relationship to the church. He is the head. He's the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, right? So we're getting Paul's transitioning here to the gospel, right? So he's not only the firstborn of creation, he's the firstborn among the dead through his resurrection, and that everything he might be preeminent. And so Paul's telling us that the attention that you're paying to this hierarchy of beings, these, if you like, angels or this kind of spiritual caste system that you're focusing on is wrong-headed. He is preeminent because all the fullness of God is pleased to dwell in him, and he will, back to the gospel now, reconcile all things to himself, all things in heaven and on earth, making peace by the blood of his cross. So there's Tim, yes.
I'm still stuck on that phrase. He's the firstborn from the dead. Just thinking about different ways of Jesus being described as Son of God, Son of Man. The Word. And I know the Philippians passage of going down and in effect freeing all those, but firstborn from the dead, that just strikes me as odd. Was that part of the angelic worship or the pre-Gnostic stuff that he's countering there?
I, I don't come across that in the pre-Gnostic stuff. Gnostics would not, real Gnostics, again, it's misleading to say this is proper Gnosticism. I think it's too soon for that historically. But Gnostics would not, one of the problems with Gnostic heresy is that when they talk about Jesus, at least kind of Christian versions of this, the problem isn't that Jesus was, today, the problem is that people don't think this person walking around in the first century was God, right? That's the objection that modern thinkers would bring to Christ. Often the objection to ancient thinkers was that he was man. So for example, in First John, John is saying he came in the flesh. You have to believe that Christ came in the flesh, right? So that Gnostic tendency would be to deny that he was man, and in particular, when he's on the cross, there's a name for this heresy, and I can't remember the name of it. Maybe one of you can help me. But when Christ was on the cross, that he wasn't really man and therefore couldn't really die, right? So there may be an emphasis here on the fact that he really did die and then was born from the dead. But it might be too early for that, for me to ascribe that phrase to Gnosticism. I probably would need help from some of our more our Bible scholar friends for that. But they're my somewhat uninformed 2 cents on that. Does that make sense? Any other questions or thoughts about some of that?
Well, just adding to Tim's, um, the firstborn of the dead, I think another phrase that has been used is the new Adam, or the second Adam.
Yeah.
That the risen Christ, is different than Adam, in that his body is transformed, he is sort of going to be like what we have to hope for when our resurrection occurs. But it's like the new Adam, and that when the kingdom is fully restored and Christ returns and the dead are raised, they will be like him.
Yeah, he in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul calls his resurrection a kind of first fruits, right? I might have talked to you guys about this before. His first fruits, if you're a farmer, which I'm far from, but if you're a farmer and you're doing your harvesting, the first fruits are an indication of the harvest to come, right? The beginning of that harvest is an indication of the quality of the harvest to come. And so in his resurrection, it's a kind of first fruits in the sense that it's giving us an indication of what our resurrection will look like, what our resurrected bodies will look like. So if we want to have a sense of what our resurrected bodies will be like, we can get some indication of that by looking at the resurrected Christ, because in that sense, he is a first fruit, and so his resurrected body's weird, right? It's a body. He eats, right? He eats in the upper room. He eats with the disciples on the beach. But he's able to sort of show up in the midst of the disciples after the resurrection when all the doors are locked, right? So they're in a room with all the doors locked, and he appears, but is still in a body. He appears and he invites, this is also interesting, he invites Thomas to touch him, right? Touch the wound in my side, the wounds in my hands. And so not only is he in a body, but the physics seems weird insofar as he can show up in the midst of locked rooms. I don't think any of us can do that. And there's a kind of continuity in his body from the pre-resurrected form to the post-resurrected form. That's kind of interesting, right? That is, the wounds of his crucifixion remain after the resurrection. And Augustine talks about this a little bit. He talks about this in the Martyrs, that in the resurrection, those wounds are somehow glorified and appear glorious to us. So they're still there, but they're transformed from marks of suffering to marks of glory and become beautiful. I'm not sure what that means, but it's interesting. And so, yeah, looking at that resurrected body points us to what ours will be like, right? And that seems like a useful exercise to do, to be thinking about what ours might be. So let's keep moving. This is a picture called Christ the Geometer. I don't know if you can see it back here on my wall. I have Brian Williams gave me an icon of this Christ the Geometer. You can't see it, but it's in the slide. It looks like the slide. So I want to start sort of transitioning to thinking about moving from the text to some of the way these pagan ideas are thrown around and what the relationships might be. So I want to focus on specific aspects of this text that are appear in maybe some Pythagorean and Platonic thinking, but also in some ancient Near Eastern thinking. So let's just get into the language a little bit. I'm going to do a lot of Greek, which should make you all nervous. I'll be way out of my depth. So take everything I say with boulders of salt. Right. So he's the firstborn of creation and he's before all things. So that's giving you his kind of priority. He's the prototokos, he's the firstborn, he's the first begotten. That refers to his rank. At least that's how Christians understand that. It refers to his rank above all of these other things. Again, his preeminence above all these other things. He is begotten, not made, right? So it's not suggesting, at least how Christians understand this, it's not suggesting that he came to being in time, but he is above all in terms of rank, right? And he is before all things. So that's talking about temporality. So he's before all things. So all things that have been made, he's before them. You're getting this story in John 1:3 also, right? So there's a kind of transcendence to him. He is distinct from all creation. He is above it and he is before it, right? So Paul's giving us a transcendence story there, right? That this is the beginning of John's prologue in many ways, right? In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God, right? That's a transcendence story. But you're also getting an immanent story with him, right? So he is related to all things. He's connected in some ways to creation. He's present. He's not part of, but he's present the rest of creation, and he's sustaining it, right? He's close. So in him all things hold together, sunastemi. If anybody can pronounce the Greek, I welcome correction. So in him, all things hold together. So at every instant, every molecule in my body is being held together by his continual sustenance, right? He causes all things to stand. He places them together. Now I'm getting more heavy-handed in terms of Pythagorean thinking, but I think this is also true of the Son. So he is putting all things in order or harmony with one another, right? So gravity works. It works consistently, right? So I drop the pen and it falls, at least in my experience, every time, right? There is a kind of order. Every morning, the sun comes up about that away for me. And every evening, the sun goes down about that away. So you can kind of see an order and a harmony in the cosmos. Who is responsible for that order and harmony? It is Christ holding things together, right? So he's responsible for bringing things into being ex nihilo, but he is also responsible for sustaining them and ordering them. And when I use this language, I can't help but think about, physics kinds of thoughts are coming through my head, right? What makes the laws of physics work? Why do they work? The sun, right? It's the word holding them together. in all things. So those of you that are engineers, you can thank Christ that you can figure out how the universe works and use it to make tools and things like that. How are we doing? Everybody okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hang in there.
Okay. And finally, in the text, an aspect of him is he's this great reconciler, right? So now you're getting the gospel through him to reconcile all things to himself, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace on the cross. So through him, he's the means by which the reconciliation is done. He's reconciling all things. So the reconciliation is comprehensive. So in my tradition, we tend to emphasize personal salvation quite a bit. And not wrongly, I don't think, but we emphasize our personal salvation in Christ, and that's right. But remember, I want us to make Christ bigger. Right? He's not just reconciling me and my brokenness to the Father. He's also reconciling all things. So all the brokenness that's all over the cosmos, not just in terms of human beings. I know some of you care deeply about human beings, but not just human beings are being reconciled. All things, all living things, the creation, all of it is being reconciled to him. It's comprehensive, right? So I think it's Romans that says that the creation groans inwardly, waiting for the redemption of our bodies, right? That all the creation is groaning as a result of the curse. And what he is doing is reconciling all things to himself, making peace, right? Making peace. And again, now I actually looked in my little lexicon. That's establishing harmony, right? By the blood of his cross. And this is important. So we'll get into some other ideas in other traditions, but none of those ideas, and they'll talk about making harmony, the Logos making harmony, but you won't get it by the blood of the cross, right? So it's important to keep what we hold to distinct from some of these pagan ideas. So this is new news, and it's good news, right? It's different. So just a really quick primer on some Greek ideas. I probably have to wrap up soon. He is the word. That's the idea of a theory or discourse or speech, reason, right? So theology is a theory of God. Biology is a theory of life. So we can see that the universe is intelligible. We see the logos of the universe. We see that order and harmony. Right? And sometimes this is just a little heavy-handed math talk. Sometimes in Latin, logos is translated ratio. But in the Vulgate, it's not. And when you're reading the Vulgate in scripture, it's translated verbum. So that you're getting that sense of word or discourse there. Chaos is being without order. It's the abyss or void. That we'll come across these words as we move forward over the next few weeks. Cosmos is taking that chaos and ordering it. It has an orderly being, orderly arrangement. It's a beautiful arrangement. So it's the opposite of the chaos. It's what happens when Logos acts on chaos, right? It's the Logos is the principle that orders. Arche is the first principle. It's actually used in Colossians 1. It's the word rulers in Colossians 1 is arche. It's a beginning. It's a first. Aperion and peros, they're not ideas that show up in Colossians, but they're related. Aperion is this idea of unlimited, indefinite substratum. There are opposites in aperion. It's related to chaos. And peros is sort of the opposite of that. It's a limit, it's an end, it's a goal. It sets boundaries on aperion. So in some ways, you could kind of think of peros acting on aperion and bringing cosmos. It's the same kind of idea. So we'll come back to this slide over the next few weeks, but I want to warn us of a couple things, and this is how I'll close. So the next chapter, Paul says, see to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy and empty deceit, according to human tradition, according to the elemental spirits of the world, and not according to Christ. So it's a warning to him. And it's interesting, this elemental spirits of the world. In the context of Colossians, he's talking about this proto-Gnosticism, this hierarchy of angelic beings, right? That's what he means by spirits. But sometimes and elsewhere in the New Testament, that word stoichion is translated heavenly bodies or even principles. So it's funny that the heavenly bodies and angels, there's some ambiguity about how distinct they are in the ancient world, right? They're on one hand, they're persons, but on the other hand, they control the heavenly bodies. They control the planets and the elements of the solar system. But they're also related to ideas, elementary principles in the world. These are almost always used negatively, right? So just keep these ideas in the back of your head. And Paul's warning us about these, about the elemental spirits of the world. And it's interesting, the Phillips translation, this is a good thing for all of us academics to hear. The Phillips translation translates it through intellectualism or high-sounding nonsense. You're going to hear plenty of that over the next couple of weeks, right? So this is a warning. We want to be careful. And I'll just close here. This is just more caution from Pseudo-Dionysius, a 5th or 6th century church father. Thus, as for the superessence of the supreme Godhead, it's not lawful for any lover of the truth, which is above all truth, to celebrate it as reason or power or mind or life or being, but rather as the most utterly surpassing all condition, movement, imagination, conjecture, name, discourse, thought, conception, being, rest, dwelling, union, limit, infinity, everything that exists. So in that list, you're seeing a few of the words that I just gave you on the previous slide, right? The reason, power, mind, discourse, thought, limit, infinity. What he's saying here is that whatever we're talking about in terms of the Christ, it's bigger than this. It surpasses this. It's not lawful for any lover of the truth to celebrate Christ, the Godhead, as those things. It's a caution for us. Let me skip ahead a little bit. For it is both the central force of all things and also their final purpose, and it is itself before all of them, and they all subsist in it. And through the fact of its existence, the world is brought into being and maintained. It is that which all things desire, right? So he's offering a warning. When we look at some of these other ideas from these other traditions, be careful, because whatever we're looking at isn't him. He surpasses them. If we love the truth, we're not celebrating these things as him. He is greater. He surpasses them. He's more than, right? Okay, I need to shut up because some of you have lives that you want to do things with, but we have a second or two
Walter,
questions.
can we go back to the last slide one more time?
Yeah.
The previous slide.
Yep.
Warning.
I say that I can. Yeah. This one. This one.
Yeah. Paul is clearly responding to philosophical ideas, Aristotelianism, Platonism, etc., proto-Gnosticism. That's in the world in which he's functioning, in the Greek world to which he's writing these letters. And so he says, do not be captive by philosophy and empty deceit according to human tradition, according to the elemental spirits of the universe. Then you have that list. It seems to me almost that Paul is saying what these elemental spirits, those kind of things, that is all human imagination and human tradition, which is not ultimately true.
Yeah, I agree. And that's the reason I wanted to get this in front of us is because we're going to be studying those human ideas over the next couple of weeks and seeing the ways in which they fall short. And that's what he's warning us against. I think very specifically, he's talking about these spiritual beings and this angel worship, but the ambiguity in the phrase is useful, right? It's not just that, it's the ideas. It's the teaching. It's these pagan human traditions that are being followed, right? That are there. Pythagoreanism is ripe with a kind of focus on the heavens, the music of the spheres, that looks at the heavenly bodies and ascribes to their order, ascribes to their behavior the logos, and that's all. I think all of that is kind of embedded and useful for us in this morning that he's looking at. So if you hear nothing else as we go into these ideas over the next few weeks, keep this in mind, right? That he's telling us that Christ is not that. That's what Pseudo-Dionysius was saying, that he is before those things and he is above all those things.
So my instruction this week from 1938. 1938 is a really lousy year. You know, the Depression, the Dust Bowl, there's no water. The farmers are going out of business. All you farmers out there, you're all going out of business, or you think you're going out of business in 1938. And things are really crappy then. And you're in trouble, buddies. All of you, you're in trouble. So here's the thought. The thought is, no, not in the name of Jesus. Pray to Jesus directly, you farmers from 1938. Pray directly to Jesus. He is your God. And you pray to him directly. First of all, you believe in Jesus, you farmers from 1938. Point number one, you believe in Jesus, accept his gift. Point number two, not in Jesus's name, you pray directly to Jesus. When you are in trouble, when you're not in trouble, pray directly to Jesus, you 38 boys.
The dog is telling me I've gone too long. That's the.
Yeah.
Well, one of the concepts I remember from my seminary days was when we looked at all the different heresies of the first couple hundred years, and Richard Lovelace said, you know, all of those heresies just kind of recycle, maybe wearing some different clothing all the way through into the present. So I'm wondering, what are some of the proto-Gnostic movements that we might not be as alert to as we should be, or you know, some of the same things that Paul's writing to the church in Colossae? How do we need to hear it?
I don't know. I don't know if this is specifically related to what's happening in New Testament Gnosticism, but proper Gnosticism seems to be a kind of suggestion that matter is evil and the spiritual realm is good. So which is not a Christian idea, right? God makes everything. He makes man, and he says that he makes things for 7 days. It's good. It's good. It's good. It's good. Then he makes Tim, and he says it's very good, right? And so the idea that matter is evil is not a Christian idea. But what ways that shows up now, perhaps, I remember when I was an undergrad, the idea that we could spiritualize the Sermon on the Mount, for example, right? That you read the Sermon on the Mount, and you read Christ's ethical teaching about caring for the poor, caring for the least of these. And we can spiritualize it. We can sort of say, okay, Paul isn't talking about the poor. He's not talking about economics, for example. He's talking about our poor state spiritually. And so that's kind of maybe you might call it evangelical Gnosticism. The idea that we're, okay, what we really need to be doing is saving people's souls, but saving their bodies, addressing things like climate change, addressing things like poverty, that's focused on the material world, and that shouldn't be our attention beams, right? That may be a way this shows up in contemporary contexts. I mean, a justice story, right? If you like, you know, thinking about the gospel in spiritual terms, but not in terms of social terms.
Well, so I had a question about the picture. Do you want to go back to the picture and say something about it? Maybe you said
Yeah.
something and I missed it, but I think it's interesting.
Yeah, we may be able to talk about this more as we get in our third week when we talk about Genesis a little bit. But you're seeing him forming the circle of the earth with his compass there, right? These are his Euclidean tools, and he's forming the circle of the earth. There's all kinds of, we'll get into this in some detail. There's some ancient Near Eastern cosmology happening there, right? And I see this now. This is Huddell talking. I don't know if this is in the mind of the painter, but I'm seeing the mathematical order of the universe showing up in the icon, right? So if you do physics, if you do engineering, the way in which you understand the universe is through mathematical means. So the way Christ creates is with I mean, we could spend a long time on this. The way Christ creates is using a kind of mathematical order, if you like. I'm not putting this terribly well. But so maybe what you're seeing there reflected is a kind of mathematical nature of the physical universe that's there. But
Were the proto-Gnostics and others trying to co-opt Jesus to support their theories and principles, or were they just misguided Christians?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm more inclined to think the latter, right? That they're being exposed to Christian thinking, and they're thinking Platonic dualist thoughts, and which lead to some Gnostic thoughts, and so all those ideas are coming together, and that's where you get this kind of proto-Gnosticism. Yeah, I mean, to what degree they're manipulating things to a certain agenda, I don't have much to say about, but.
All right. Any other comments, questions, discussion? Does your dog have anything to add to the conversation?
No, we're out of our routine, so she's grumpy.
So why don't you close this to prayer and then spend some time with your grumpy dog.
Let's praise the Lord. Thank you for being able to spend time with these guys. Thank you for the way they help me see you more fully, and Lord willing, the way your word can help them see you more fully. Take us from here into your world to do good work for your sake, and may you be seen in everything that we do. Help us to love our neighbors well. We ask in the name of Christ. Amen.
Amen.